Christmas Eve, 1914, parts of the Western Front went quiet. Not because the war was ending or because someone had negotiated a ceasefire. The soldiers just decided to stop shooting. German troops climbed out of their trenches. British soldiers watched for a moment, probably convinced it was some kind of trap, and then climbed out too. These guys had been actively trying to kill each other for months, and now they were walking into no man's land like it was a neighborhood street. They shook hands, they traded cigarettes, some of them laughed. This was World War I, the conflict that would eventually kill 17 million people, and right in the middle of it, enemies decided to act like human beings for a few hours. Nobody ordered this. High Command definitely didn't authorize it, and when they found out, they were furious. But that comes later. So what could possibly make enemies stop fighting in the deadliest war Europe had ever seen? This is the story of the Christmas Truce during the First World War. The thing about late 1914 is that the war was still fresh. Soldiers on both sides had genuinely believed they'd be home by Christmas when they signed up back in August. The recruiting posters promised adventure and glory, and young men were worried they'd miss the whole thing if they didn't enlist fast enough. And that optimism aged poorly. By December, the Western Front had turned into an endless network of trenches stretching from the English Channel to Switzerland. Nobody was going home. Nobody was winning. Everyone was just stuck in frozen mud, waiting for something to change. But December 1914 was different from what came later. The war hadn't broken these men yet. They were still mostly regular guys, farmers, factory workers, shopkeepers, who'd been fighting for a few months but hadn't experienced the industrial slaughter that would define the conflict. The trenches were also close enough that you could hear the enemy. In some sectors, soldiers could make out conversations, coughing, singing. These weren't abstract monsters on the other side. They were voices in the dark. Same religion, same holidays, same longing for home. The war hadn't taught them to hate yet. So how does something like this actually start? Not with a treaty, not with a white flag, but with singing. On Christmas Eve, German soldiers started decorating their trenches. And look, decorating is a generous term here. We're talking about guys who were living in frozen mud holes, trying to create some semblance of Christmas. They put up small trees, lit candles, hung lanterns along the parapet. From the British lines, it probably looked like the Germans had lost their minds or were planning something. Then the singing started. Stille Nacht, silent night, drifting across no man's land in the dark. British soldiers listened. Some of them recognized the melody. Same song, different language. And after a while, they started singing back. English carols answering German ones, call and response across a frozen battlefield. Then someone shouted, "Merry Christmas," in English from the German trenches. More shouts, back and forth, broken English, broken German, men who couldn't really communicate, finding ways to communicate anyway. But nobody moved. Not yet. I want you to understand what no man's land actually was. This wasn't some neutral zone. This was the kill box, the space between opposing trenches where machine guns overlapped and artillery had zeroed in. Bodies lay there for weeks because retrieving them meant joining them. It was cratered, frozen, strewn with wire and debris and the dead. And now men were walking into it, unarmed, standing upright. The first ones out were taking an insane risk. The guys watching from the trenches had their fingers on triggers. One wrong move, one nervous soldier, and this becomes a massacre instead of a miracle. But it held. Germans and British met in the middle, shook hands, tried to talk. Most of them didn't share a language, so they gestured, laughed at the absurdity of it, pointed at things, mimed. And then came the part nobody talks about enough. They buried the dead together. See, both sides had men lying in no man's land, had been there for weeks in some cases. The truce gave them a chance to finally recover those bodies. German soldiers helped carry British dead. British soldiers helped dig German graves. They held joint services, said prayers in different languages over shared losses. After the burials, the mood shifted, lighter. Men exchanged addresses promising to write after the war. They showed each other photographs, wives, children, parents, the same photos everyone carried, the same hopes everyone held. For a few hours, the battlefield became something else entirely. Then comes the best part, the gift exchange. This part is absolutely real. Soldiers swapped whatever they had. Cigarettes were the main currency. Both sides had them, both sides wanted more. Tobacco went back and forth like some kind of nicotine-based peace treaty. Chocolate, jam, tinned meat, buttons and badges from uniforms, caps. Anything that could be traded was traded. Now, these might sound like small things, but you have to understand trench conditions. These guys were freezing, starving, and miserable. A tin of jam wasn't just food, it was a luxury. A German cigarette wasn't just tobacco, it was proof that the enemy was human enough to share. The small stuff meant everything. Multiple accounts even confirm that they played football during this truce. Now, it won't be a Christmas until we have good food, right? But trench rations in 1914 were not exactly gourmet. British soldiers were eating bully beef, canned corned beef that was mostly salt and regret, hard biscuits that could double as building materials, tin stew that tasted like the tin it came in, tea when they could heat water. German rations weren't much better. Bread that was already going stale, sausage if they were lucky, ersatz coffee that was coffee in name only. This was their survival food, and during the truce, sharing meant splitting what little you had. Cigarettes moved around constantly. Chocolate got broken into pieces and handed over. Jam, specifically plum and apple jam, became weirdly popular as a trade item. Some accounts mention alcohol, but that was rarer, and commanders definitely didn't love that idea. And then it was over. Not because the soldiers wanted it to end. Most of them would have been perfectly happy to keep the truce going indefinitely. Some sectors maintained informal ceasefires for days. But the officers were furious. High command on both sides saw the truce as a catastrophic breakdown of discipline. And from their perspective, it was. You cannot run a war if your soldiers refuse to fight. You cannot maintain an enemy if your troops keep discovering the enemy is just some guy named Hans who has the same complaints about the food. So orders came down hard. No more contact with the enemy. No more truces. No more humanity. Soldiers who participated were threatened with court-martial. Units were rotated away from sectors where they'd made friendly contact. Couldn't risk them recognizing the men they'd have to shoot. Artillery was ordered to fire on no man's land to prevent any more meetings. The Christmas Truce wasn't a failure of war discipline, but it was a glimpse of what war had to destroy in order to continue.